Huge chaos continues to come into the financial markets, the geopolitical markets right now. Oil prices are being erratic. The US stock market is being erratic. The silver price has been bouncing up and down. And in today's video, we're going to be breaking down the latest from the conflict in the Middle East, how it's impacting the financial market. So how the financial market is playing out, what's happening, why is it so erratic right now, what is the prices of lots of different assets doing. And we'll also talk about the breaking intel and what comes next in this conflict, because, at the moment, the fog of war is over the battlefield and things are escalating once again. So if that sounds good, just like the video and let's get straight into today's update. So the first thing we need to understand right now is the financial markets in the last 24 hours, they have been, operating extremely erratically. So the S&P 500 erases losses and turns green as US oil prices fall below $93 per barrel. And I have to say, it wasn't just the oil price that was erratic yesterday. It was also the silver price was extremely erratic. And you guys know we love our gold and silver here on the channel. And you can see right here, $65, it hit a recent low. So extreme fear coming into the market right here because people don't know what's going on. They think it's actually going to get worse. We'll break down exactly what happens next, but you can see $65, which is insane to see that kind of drop off. Same deal with gold. So gold erasing, nearly $500 within 48 hours right here. And oil, which we'll talk about soon, just bouncing up and down right now as people try and figure out what Trump's going to do next. How does this all play out, this whole situation? So all the financial markets right now, they are centered around this conflict that we'll get into. And you can see right here, DXY. Dropping, then going back up again. So again, very much a volatile, mirroring exactly what's happening in the Middle East right now. Now, one big piece of intel we do have is, even though Trump has been saying, potentially boots on the ground, maybe there isn't boots on the ground, he's not going to rule out anything. One thing we are seeing with real evidence, and I think in this conflict, one of the most important things you need to do is you have to actually figure out what they're actually doing, not so much what they're saying. Because if you go off what Trump is saying, you guys know in the past, Trump has negotiated with Iran and then, launched an attack against Iran. That happened in the past. So what's actually happening is based off this open source intelligence, the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group, comprised of the USS Boxer, USS Comstock, and the USS Portland, with the embarked 11th Marine Expeditionary Group, is on the way to the Middle East after departing the US West Coast for deployment. So we are seeing more US forces starting to go to the Middle East. And the thing about this is actually an amphibious, assault group, okay? So this is the assets you would deploy to the region if you're looking to take over islands or you're looking to secure the Strait of Hormuz. So that is breaking, intel. It continues to get on its way. We also have some big twists coming out of multiple nations, and I don't really know exactly what this actually is going to equate to, but have a look at this. We've seen a bit of a flip. This is breaking. The UK, France, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands and Japan have released a joint statement expressing their readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure the safe passage of commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, does that mean military escalations? Does that mean warships? Does that mean fighter jets? I've actually asked Grok this question, and he does say right here, this signals diplomatic backing for a potential multinational naval operation to protect shipping, similar to past freedom of navigation efforts or Red Sea coalitions. He says fighter jets are improbable, and it says maybe, naval assets like frigates and destroyers from those countries. But again, they've just signaled that they're looking to back the USA. And the big picture is here, they flipped, right? So Macron, first he said he's not getting involved, and now we have a joint statement from all these countries. And I think part of the reason behind this is because the Strait of Hormuz, as this thing drags on, you're going to see it around the world. I mean, Australia just recently had, I think it was like 90 petrol stations has no diesel in it. And there's going to be other countries out there that is, if this thing escalates, you're going to see countries ration fuel. You're going to see countries not have enough fuel at the petrol station. If the fuel stops, guys, that's when chaos breaks out. So they're trying to scramble and figure out what is the best course of action right here. And we have also seen some interesting things develop with the oil market. So one thing that is starting to perplex me even more about this whole conflict is US oil as well. So if you have a look at this, so this is coming out of Adam Kobaisi over here. So the US is ironically relatively shielded from rising oil prices abroad. Crude oil prices in Oman are trading at a $70 premium to WTI crude, hitting record highs. Meanwhile, the US is getting less than 8% of its oil from the Persian Gulf at just 500,000 barrels per day. And I just want to pause it right there. So if the US is getting, less than 8% from the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf regions, what is this conflict even in the national interest of the US? Is this even strategically that important to the US? It's a huge question because it's literally 8%. So what they're saying is 92% of US oil is not even impacted from this region, which is even raises more questions about why is the US so involved in this and why is the US so committed to military action in this region if they're only getting like 8% out of this? And would there be, better, more diplomatic routes for this whole conflict in comparison to launching a massive kind of military operation against the Iranian government? That's one of the biggest questions on a lot of people's mind, because a lot of people out there, and I had to listen into that Tucker Carlson interview yesterday with, Joe Kent, is it really in the national interest, this whole entire conflict, to go about the way it's going about right now? That's a good question, and but that's important to understand. Only 8% of the oil is actually affecting US. That's probably most likely why these other countries are kind of coming to the table right now, because they're, Trump has probably said to them, maybe there's been some backroom negotiation or backroom deal right here that we're not privy to, but he's putting pressure on these countries saying, if you don't get involved, your oil will get cut off maybe some way. That's what Trump is saying right there. So he's kind of almost forcing some action right there. And we have actually seen more interesting escalations from the war. One thing that is also conflicting with, President Trump's comments recently is we do have evidence that an F-35 jet for the first time ever was hit from a surface-to-air missile in the skies over Iran. And these things are not supposed to get hit. So you can see the screenshot before it actually gets hit. We won't play the clip because, I don't want YouTube to flag these videos, and we already are getting suppressed with the algorithm, so I don't want to get suppressed anymore with these videos. But you can see right here, this was targeted by the Iranian, surface-to-air defense. And, this also raises more questions. Trump says all the Iranian air defense systems are gone. So why is an F-35 getting shot out of the sky, and why did it need to make an emergency landing at an airbase in the Middle East due to hostile fire over Iran? And this is obviously, scared a lot of people in the US military, because these jets, they're not supposed to get hit, and they're not supposed to get hit by Iran after how many weeks of, the US and Israel striking this country and supposedly destroying all their military infrastructure. It's a really, interesting question, interesting development. And we also have more escalations. And this time, you guys know yesterday, the LNG plant of Iran got hit, which supplies, 70% plus of Iran's energy. And they've actually struck back at Haifa. So Iran just hit the Bazan refinery in Haifa, Israel's largest oil processing facility. The refinery runs at 197,000 barrels per day and supplies 65% of Israel's diesel, 59% of its gasoline, and 52% of its kerosene last year. Israel has now only one backup refinery in Ashdod. So there's only 2 refineries in Israel. And the Iranians are claiming, I've seen other official sources from the spokespeople out there, that they're showing restraint right now. So there is the potential that this could even escalate even more, right? So we have to, factor that in. And some of the big, accounts over on X are talking about Netanyahu's latest, speech that he discussed. And they're speculating based off this. And again, this is just this person's opinion. If Netanyahu is saying this, expect that the White House will soon begin, or has already begun, looking for an off-ramp in the conflict against Iran. But the real question is, is that off-ramp even feasible right now? And we'll get to these options that are discussed by Mario at the end of the video, but there's 2 main options that are at play. But before we do, I want to let people know this is now escalating, and the US Pentagon has asked the White House to approve more than $200 billion to fund the war in Iran. $200 billion. So if you're a US taxpayer, your money is most likely going to go fund this even more. It's already cost $30 billion in 3 weeks. And I have seen some viral tweets over on X that are saying, you know, the GOP in America, they denied the US building a $17 billion wall on its southern border, but somehow they can come up with $200 billion for this, you know, almost war that potentially might be against the American people's interest. It's a really good question. And people are raising lots of questions about this conflict as it grows more and more unpopular right here. It is just a very, very interesting development. Now let's talk about the future potential outcomes of this war. So we'll break this down, we'll read it out, and I'll talk to you guys about it. So Mario says right here, Iran's military has exceeded US and Israeli expectations. They continue to heavily strike the Gulf in Israel and have introduced more capable and more destructive missiles as the war escalates. Trump has two options. Number one, seek an off-ramp, accept the loss, betray it as a win to his voter base, and move to the next target of Cuba. Number two, escalate, strike Iranian infrastructure, and bleed the country into submission with the option of sending troops to seize the Strait of Hormuz. Option one avoids further US debt and munition shortages, but gives up on the objectives of controlling the Strait of Hormuz. This would be a massive win for China and giving it energy supremacy and a huge edge in the AI race. Option two could lead to capitulation of the Iranian regime, meaning the US control over the straits, allowing long-term leverage over China. However, Iran could also turn it into a forever war, a failed state with hundreds of thousands of dead. Think Iraq, but worse. And Mario speculates right here, I feel Trump has made up his mind and seems to go all the way. The long-term strategic importance of the Strait seems to outweigh the risks of another forever war. So, you know, Mario's kind of bringing in China to some degree. And look, it does support the evidence that, you know, US oil from the region, again, it's only less than 7%, 8%. You know, my point of view about this whole conflict is Trump, I mean, this could have easily been avoided with, you know, diplomacy. Diplomacy generally is a better answer. So if you actually objectively analyze where we're up to right now, you have an Iranian government that seems to be fighting back very effectively. You have missile shields not working in allied countries in the Middle East. They're getting hammered. US has lost billions of dollars of worth of military bases have been struck. There's been lots of casualties. And the Strait of Hormuz is violently under the control of Iran. So I think if Trump could rewind the clock right now, he'd probably want to go back to day zero and not maybe start this conflict. But it does seem there is that potential, as we saw at the start of the video right here. You know, things are on the way to the Middle East, so it might even further escalate. So the question is, if Trump does decide to go all the way with this conflict, which might potentially happen, can Iran effectively defend against a US, you know, ground incursion onto the island to seize the Strait of Hormuz or the coastline around that? So not so much, you know, trying to land in Tehran and take over the government buildings and things like that. You know, can the US actually, you know, pull this off? Can Iran effectively defend against this? This is probably one of the biggest questions on everyone's mind as it goes to its, you know, near final phase of this conflict. That's what we have to pay attention to. So the US might be trying to psych Iran out with this statement right here as well. So if Iran thinks that all these countries are coming to get them, you know, they might potentially, you know, maybe try and call a ceasefire or negotiate or something like that based off that as well. So remember, there's so many games getting played at so many levels, psychological warfare. I'm not going to claim I know exactly what's going to happen right here, but I will say it's a costly war. And it's an unpopular conflict. We're going to have to see how this whole thing plays out. And one thing, you know, to expect in the financial markets is, look, volatility is the name of the game. You can just see how much these prices are swinging around. And I think, you know, fundamentally, if you think about assets for the long term, just think about the long-term value of these assets. You know, are the fundamentals changing? Is there a need for these assets in the future? But I think in the short term, you know, obviously this is probably the most pivotal moment in time or, you know, history for the US in a long time in the Middle East. So again, a lot of big things up for stake from both sides, the US, Iran, Israel. It's all really happening. And we're going to have to see how this all plays out. But that's your major update for today to keep you fully in the know. I hope you guys get value out of it, and appreciate you tuning in. I hope you have a good one. I'll see you in the next one.